Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this very special lecture. This is our bonus bonus lecture from our scholar, where Cantor Matt Austerklein, who I'm going to read his bio in a second, is really sharing some of his personal scholarship as he continues in his learning. Cantor Matt is a prayer leader, a musician, and a scholar, exploring the religious meaning of Jewish musical forms. As a congregational cantor for over a decade, Matt has worked in diverse pastoral, life cycle, and educational settings. He serves as a mentor to new student cantors, and he works on projects shaping the Jewish musical future. Matt is a multi-genre artist of contemporary and classic Jewish music. He is currently a PhD candidate in Jewish studies at Halle-Wittenberg University in Germany, where he is writing his dissertation on the professionalization of Ashkenazi cantors in early modern Europe. I'll introduce myself. I'm Rabbi Marcia Tilchin, the founder of the Jewish Collaborative of Orange County and one of the conveners of this midsummer retreat, Shakespeare and Sacred Text. We're thrilled to have a wonderful group with us in the room, and also delighted to have those of you joining us on Zoom. And Matt is a fairly new friend, but a highly esteemed colleague, and we are so grateful that you are with us. Thank you. Let's give him a big hand.
Thank you so very much to Rabbi Cantor Marcia Tilchin, the Jewish Collaborative of Orange County, to Dr. Julia Lupton, and to Olivia Roll with the UCI School for Humanities and the new Swan Shakespeare Center here at UCI. I am really excited to get started. Let me just make sure that we are all, and also welcome. Can we have a round of applause to all of our Zoomers in from far and wide? We're waving to you. We're so glad you're here. And I'm going to speak, and there will be time for questions at the end, at which point you'll be able to unmute. If you have any technical issues or questions, please direct them to Olivia Roll, who is doing our tech management. Thank you so much, Olivia, for doing that for us today. Okay, so I'm going to mute everybody, if you'll excuse me. And then, okay, all are muted. Very good. All right. Well, in a good Hasidic tradition, of which today has almost nothing to do with Hasidus and with Jewish mysticism, maybe just a little bit. Let's begin, and let me teach you a melody that is, I know for a fact, very old. I die, 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 die. Everyone, first of all, opening note. Online, you can hum too. From the beginning. Now listen for this one. Put those together. Very good. You got that first half very well. Listen. And the end sounds like something from before. Is that? Let's try the whole thing. Congratulations, you guys know, or beginning to know, and I'll bring it back a little later, a at least 500-year-old melody. Congratulations, everybody. But we'll have to wait to find out where it's from. If music be the food of love, play on. Yet music, like love, is an ephemeral thing. It exists in time rather than in space. What did the Psalms, let's see, make sure there we go, it works. What did the Psalms of the temple sound like? Or the Jewish music at the time of Jesus of Nazareth or of the rabbis, or even in the medieval era, hundreds of years later? Reconstructing such things takes incredibly deep sensitivity and listening into historical documents. And the full picture of any of these things is difficult, except perhaps to some of the most erudite of scholars, let alone to the average person just trying to sing and connect. Yet, we can reconstruct European Christian music for nearly a millennium and have access to thousands upon thousands of compositions which children and adults could sing or play today. Why is Jewish music in the age of Shakespeare and before so hard to study? European Christianity developed a profound technology in the Middle Ages. We may take it for granted. We have whole schools based upon it. It's called musical notation. Yes, everyone got it here. I'm sure online too. Musical notation. There's some great pictures, right? Very, very beautiful. Okay. So musical notation. The ability to freeze sound in time so that it can be replicated and understood by others. This culture of freezing sound into a literate culture, into musical literacy, created amazing opportunities for musical complexity. Play and chant, harmony, polyphony, counterpoint, and then bigger things, symphonies and chamber music and oratorio and opera, and all sorts of grand innovations and documents that we can learn and study and digest. European and particularly Christian music, at least in the first and second estates, in the church and in the nobility, is marked by being a literate culture, creating musical complexity and beauty based in notated and later in printed music. But Jewish music develops quite differently. The ideal of Jewish culture for at least 1,500 years after the destruction of the temple and even until today is as not a literate culture of music, but an oral culture, Olivia, would you grab the door right there just a second? Thank you. Music was deeply connected to relational experiences, sitting around, as we see here, a communal meal. I think this is a Pesach meal. Having communal prayer and weddings and funerals and celebrations. The music of these things could only be learned by ear, more like a band learns things than an orchestra learns things. That's true even today, not outside of Ashkenazi context, outside of Yiddish-speaking German Jewish and American Jewish contexts. Notation plays a secondary or non-existent role in the construction of music culture. Orality in Jewish culture was a defining principle for Jews, not because of just a lack of technology for musical literacy and complexity, like Western notation, but also because oral music culture meant a tight-knit relational music culture, not based on specialized access to reading music, but on the relational and communal experiences that gave rise to music. And again, we can see these cultures sort of in dialogue today, not just in Jewish realms, but all over the place, right? The sort of ethos of the band and ethos of the jam session or the drum circle versus the ethos of the musical theater performance and the symphony and things which are really reliant on Western notation in that way. But within the last 500 years, Western notation and the musical structures and social structures that it created made a slow leak into Jewish life, culminating in the 19th century, where the Enlightenment saw a gigantic boom and normalization of Western notation in German Jewish, Ashkenazi Jewish musical life, and in some Sephardi, some Spanish Jewish contexts as well. This is all a preface to say, how can we speak of Jewish music in the age of Shakespeare? Today, I'll try to cover this in 3 ways, which really describe not just music of Jewish experience, but Jewish involvement in European musical life, which as transnational immigrants and social innovators, they actually helped shape in very profound ways. So we're going to cover, number 1, Jewish activity as musicians, which they were in secular contexts, and which we are very quite close to Shakespeare, indeed. Observations of specifically Jewish music in the age of Shakespeare, that's number 2. And then just a little bit of my own doctoral research, which focuses on Ashkenazi cantors and how they acquired musical notation and complexity during the 17th and the 18th centuries. All right, a map. As they used to say on Carmen Sandiego, let's go on the map. Anyone watch that show? I came up in the 90s. The scholar David Ruderman writes that Jews of the early modern period experienced, among many factors, accelerated mobility, either due to expulsions or a financial opportunity, leading to enhanced contact between Jews of different backgrounds. And you can just see, because of all the squiggly red lines here, how much migration and movement there was. One of the particularly germane to the age of Shakespeare, or let's say to Tudor England, was the expulsion from Spain in 1492. Here we are, 1492 and 1497. Jews go to the Ottoman Empire, they go to North Africa, they go to Italy, and they go to Amsterdam and to Venice in particular. They go all over the place. The exile from Spain, we might actually like to think that these Spanish exiles, like, you know, poor immigrants, right? We saw at Ellis Island, oh, the wandering Jews, and now they come in, they're poor, and they want to make it in the new Golden Medina of Venice, or is it wherever, Italy, wherever they are. But the exile from Spain was not necessarily poor Jews at all. In fact, the exile from Spain, nothing could be further from the truth. The exile from Spain was anyone of Jewish blood. It was racially based, including many acculturated and converted Christians who were former Jews, who were affluent and successful in Spanish Christian society. The Ottoman Sultan welcomed them, as we see, to his court in Constantinople. You can see on the right side of the map. He famously quipped, quote, "The Spanish king impoverishes his own kingdom to enrich mine." And he was right. Spanish and Portuguese Jews, or as they would come to be known as Sephardic Jews, enriched the culture anywhere they went. They were affluent and had access to culture and technology and music, as we'll see. They were especially part of the transformation of Western music in ways recognizable to us today, and which were very recognizable, as we will see shortly, to the Tudor monarchy. So Sephardic Jews came to Italy and had an outsized impact among many ways as musicians and as makers of musical instruments, shaping the course of European music history. The scholar David Ravinius points attention to this fresco on the left and in color on the right, from the Santa Maria della Consolazione church in Ferrara in Italy, which you can see in the red. This was completed between 1504 and 1508. What we are looking at here, the instrument on the left here, is the first known image of what would become the modern viola. It has 4 strings, a rounded bridge, a scroll with 4 pegs, no frets, and is being played off the shoulder with a bow. And this is not the only fresco featuring one in Ferrara painted in these same years. Ravinius argues that early violins, in the form we know today, came over from Spain, from Valencian instrument makers who were Sephardic Jews. Ercole d'Este, who was the Marquis of Ferrara, like other monarchs in Venice and like the Sultan we heard, were keen to welcome these savvy immigrants to enrich their territory and culture. Ercole, and especially his daughter Isabella d'Este, are credited as being patrons for music and with developing the modern violin family of musical instruments with analogous shapes to the ones we have today, and analogous musical structure, analogous building structure. These Sephardic Jews, many of them having been former converts to Christianity, were sufficiently able to navigate Christian societies in the elite and creative classes, dramatically influencing the practice of musical instrument manufacturing as part of their patrons' noble cultural ambitions. Even more recent research by Luigi Sisto confirms another outsized impact of Sephardic Jews as leading makers of stringed instruments in the Kingdom of Naples, right nearby. And as musicians, these Sephardic Jews became well-known, so well-known indeed, that they attracted the interest of a very particular Englishman, Henry VIII. In 1539, as Rivinus and other scholars point out, a briefly single Henry VIII wanted to court his next wife, Anne of Cleves, in the most regal fashion possible. So he wrote to his ambassador in Venice for the latest fashions in music. His ambassador got for him 6 top musicians who illegally immigrated to England. Remember, England had kicked out all of its Jews in 1290. There was no formal permission for Jews to come back. Yet he imported Anthony Moises, Ambrose del Male Lupus or Lopez, Francisco Querimo, Anthony Maria Kozan or Curzon, Francis Kenner, which is like Kinor, the word for violin in Hebrew, and Jacob Gallardello, all with names that indicated Jewish extraction. Remember, Henry's willingness to work with Jews predates this. When did Henry first write to Venice? We learned about this early in the afternoon. About marriage. He had written these Venetian rabbis, hey, divorce, this is levirate marriage with my first wife should be annulled, right? Because of Leviticus. And so Henry, who was a composer himself, his willingness to work with Jews is notable in English history. Henry would also invite another family of wind players into his court, the Bassano family, also likely assimilated Sephardic Jews who actually initially they married into the families of these other Sephardic musicians I just mentioned. And some of you who are Shakespeare nerds may be a little familiar with one of the members of this family who figured largely, according to some scholars, in the life of William Shakespeare. Emilia Lanier, who married the court musician, who was originally Amelia Bassano, married the court musician Alphonse Lanier, was born and baptized in England, her father being Baptista Bassano, one of the Jewish wind players brought by Henry VIII. And again, like a lot of Jews and Sephardic Jews, they were used to being in both worlds, to being baptized and being part of the Christian culture, while perhaps secretly having their own religion at home or acculturating, depending on the family. So it was contended in 1973, I think it was Roger Pryor, if I'm not mistaken, that Emilia was in fact the dark lady of Shakespeare's sonnets. Now, I cannot rehearse the whole argument today. This is a very contested part of the elite realms of Shakespearean scholarship. I will only point out 2 things. That Shakespeare incorporated the character Bassanio in The Merchant of Venice can have really limited sources for a name like that, and most likely his acquaintance with this prominent musician family in the Tudor court. Secondly, I just want to show you that Amelia is also the author of this book, which I mentioned earlier in the afternoon, Salve Deus Rex Judeorum, Hail God, King of the Jews, containing which is one of the first books of English poetry by a female author, which contains some of the earliest feminist writings in the English language. You see here, it talks about the Passion of the Christ, Eve's Apology in the Defense of Women, number 2, the Tears of the Daughters of Jerusalem, number 3, and the Salutation and Sorrow of the Virgin Mary. All these last 3 dealing with a feminine perspective on God. And I like how it says, with diverse other things not unfit to be read. How humble indeed. So let's hear what Amelia's father and grandfather would have most certainly played. This composition for 2 flutes by Henry VIII himself, written just after the Bassanos' arrival in court. So to do this, well, I have to mute myself, but I will make sure my sound is shared. Folks in the chat, this is my first time sharing a video, so if it works, please just message Olivia. If it doesn't work, also message Olivia. All right, here we go. It's all on YouTube these days, right? It's great. So you can imagine that I am unmuted. Yes, okay. So having followed the contributions of Sephardic Jews to Italian and then the English courts, let's return to the continent, to Europe, for music made by Jews and for Jews. We have so little notation prior to 1750 because Jews' lives were dominated by oral music cultures. They simply did not have access, for many reasons, to technology. But we do have a number of fragments by Jews and by Christians listening to and writing down Jewish music. They give us some insight into Jewish music of this time. But I cannot get into this section without crediting three of my colleagues, these three scholar musicians who have been done and are continue to do amazing research and performance of this music, bringing it to life again. So on the right, you have Cantor Yalda Rebling. She's sort of a pioneer in this in the 80s and 90s, recorded, I believe, 3 or 4 CDs in Germany of music of the Jewish Middle Ages, right when some of these newer things, including the thing I learned at the beginning, were just coming out. Well, rediscovered, really. They're 500 years old. So Yalda Rebling is actually a cantor working in Berlin, Germany, and she does a lot of interfaith work with the Psalms, with Muslims and Jews and Christians as a renewal cantor, and is a wonderful pioneer in this field. Inspired by her was my thesis advisor and an amazing scholar, Dr. Diana Matut, who you're going to hear later today, who performs with her ensemble Simchat HaNefesh, performs Jewish melodies that were actually, we have notation of because they were written down in Christian books as they were Christian melodies that, like the Wellerman, which I taught you 2 days ago, were just, they took the Christian melody and then wrote their own words to it, which were relevant to them. But I recommend her band, which you're going to hear in about 15 minutes. And most especially, Avery Gosfield is from, I hope this is the right one, is from America. She is from Philadelphia originally, but she lives now in Worms, Germany. Her ensemble is called Ensemble Lucidarium, and they do Renaissance and Baroque improvisation based on a lot of this material as well, on the earliest material. And you'll learn a little bit more about them. But I just want to give them credit because these are the women, the scholars who are doing the work. I'm happily reporting on it. So moving on. The earliest Ashkenazi or German piece of music that we have rediscovered about 40 years ago dates to 1510 at the latest. It was written down by a Christian Hebraist, a Christian who was very theologically and academically interested in Jews, who must have gone to some Shabbat dinner with the Jewish collaborative of his local area, its local synagogue, with a Jewish informant, someone who was friendly with him. And he remembered this song that they sang around the table, and he wrote it down. He wrote the Hebrew down, he wrote the pronunciation down, and he wrote the notation down like this in old style notation. Yes, is there a quick question? Yes, he wrote right to left. He wrote the notes right to left for this particular thing because he knew I was a Hebraist and he could write right to left. Now we have some things older than this. We have little snippets from the 11th and 12th century. A guy named Ovadia Hager, who was a convert from Christianity to Judaism, wrote down, we're not sure what I'm not sure what exact tradition it is, but this is one of the fullest melodies that we have. And so it has been notated thanks to a wonderful notation from Avery Gosfield. I am recommending this book, which you can look at afterwards. Music and Jewish Culture in Early Modern Italy is a delicious book of a lot of new research on some of the stuff I'm talking about today.
And then it's from what year, this notation?
This notation, the notation's from 1510. Okay. This notation is a transcription so that we can all sing it. But I'm going to sing it for you, and so you can get a sense of the whole thing. Oops. This is a Sur Michelot, a Sabbath song. So listen to it. It sounds strophic. It is strophically structured, but it's a little bit different between each verse. So Michelot halu barchu emunai, sovanu verosanu kidbar Adonai. So Michelot halu barchu emunai, sovanu verosanu kidbar Adonai.
Azones olam Eloheinu Avinu, ochanu es lachem oveyenu shosinu, alkenu derishmo, unhalelo befinu, omarnu ve'oninu, ken kadosh kai Adonai. Beshir bekol toda devorech Eloheinu, על ארץ חמדו שהנחיל אבותינו, מזון וצדע השביע נפשנו, חסדו גבור עלינו, וימס אדוני. רחם בחסדך על עמך צורנו, על ציון משכן כבודך זבול מציף ארצנו. ובן דוד עבדך יבוא ויגאלנו, ורוח אבינו משיח אדוני. יבנה המקדש אל ציון תמלא, נשיר שיר חדש ובהמנונה נעלה. הרחמן הנקדש יסברך ויסעלה, על כוס יין מלא, כברכת אדוני.
There it is. It probably was not sang with such round Western tones to the extent that I can do that. Now, one of the things that the oral cultures of the Jews did, as I tried to describe, was that they took well-known melodies. This melody is a German Jewish melody. It's old. One of the things they did was they took melodies they knew, German or otherwise, or their own, and they put them to their own texts. And some of these texts, especially in Terzarima, in Italy, were written to known Italian poetic forms like Terzarima, Notavarima, things that improvisational Italian poetry were written to. There's a really wonderful article by Avery Gusfield who does this research in this book. Here, I'm going to show you a Yiddish song from the 1490s, from 1514, written by a certain man named Elia Bochor Levita. He was a German Jew. He came to Italy around 1492. By the way, northern Italy was mostly German Jews. It was mostly Jews who came down from Germany in the 14th century, 15th century, and they were, then they sort of mixed with the Italian Jews, and then Sephardic Jews came in 1492. It was a big cosmopolitan mix of all of them. Now, Gosfield writes about Levita that he gained fame as a scholar, a teacher, an author, and an editor, even beyond the Jewish community. He was well known to the Christian community in high regard. And he also wrote Yiddish poems, which were published by nascent Hebrew and Yiddish publishing houses in northern Italy. Remember, the Talmud is published in northern Italy in 1558. So there's a lot of, there are 3 times the amount of Jews in Italy at this time than there are in Poland. Italy is a major center for Jews. But since some of you here, you've heard Yiddish things before, actually know something by this man. And you probably don't even know it. Who knows the term Bobe Maise? Very good. A couple of people. What does the term Bobe Maise mean? A gossip.
A story told by your grandmother.
A gossip or a bube, a story told by your bube, which is a Eastern European term for your grandma. It's actually not the case. Bube is not originally bube, it's baba. A baba maise or a bovo maise from Elia Bochor's very, 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 very famous Bovo Buch, written and completed between 1504 and 1507 and 1514. A Yiddish adaptation of a well-known, I'm not even kidding you, Anglo-Norman romance about an English knight, Sir Bevis of Hampton, known in Italy as Buovo d'Antona. So, Buovo d'Antona, Buovo Buch, Baba Buch, Bobe Buch, Bobe Maise, a tale of Bevis of Hampton. Bovo d'Antona. This thing got around, clearly, so much so that it still is part of our vernacular 500 years later, even though we have no idea, typically, of where it comes from. So, by the way, just so you know, Bevis of Hampton is not the only English knight-based romance that got adapted into Yiddish. Arthurian legend also got translated into Yiddish starting in the 14th century and on into different iterations through the 18th century. This is probably something, if Fiddler on the Roof in Yiddish really worked, maybe the new Swan can do, King Arthur in Yiddish. It's got to be Old Yiddish, which is more like German. So maybe the German department will help us, but we can get Jason Fetty to do the music. Those of you who Google jasonfetty.com, you'll know why I say that. So what does this have to do with this whole melody we just learned? Elia Bochur writes a satirical song about a fire in Venice in 1514, the real fire. Das Lied auf die Schreife von Venedig, a song for Purim. Why is there a Purim song about a fire? Purim was also often a social outlet where parodies would point out the hypocrisies in your society or in your community and to show the dirty gossip and the dirty underbelly, the dirty laundry that people were trying not to show the rest of the year. And this song makes fun of certain Jews who behave badly during the fire when Venice is burning. And what does Elia Bochur write? This is the point. He writes that this should be sung to the tune of Zur Mishelo, the Nigun Zur Mishelo. And because he's an Ashkenazi Jew, he's a German Jew, and the notation we have is written down just 4 years earlier, it is incredibly likely, and Avery does a comparison of the style of the poetry in the song, that this is the exact nigun, the exact melody that was used to sing the Schreife Lied from Benedict that we're about to see. So I want to show you this recording. My friend, I'm not gonna play it until we're really ready, so I won't get a double audio. The singer here is Enrico Fink, who is my colleague who I met in Oxford. He's the president of the Jewish community in Florence, and he toured. This is Ensemble Lucidarium. This is Avery Gosfield's ensemble, and you'll see them in English and in Western Yiddish, in Old Yiddish, singing the beginning. I'll just play the beginning of this song. Let me get to the 6.
I would sing to you a while, with what little voice I may, and tell you of the fire of that awful day when Venice was alight with a fearful blaze as big as the whole world for the wrath of our Lord. It was the most horrendous roar as Rialto went in flames, and lo, they cried and it was the most horrendous roar as Rialto went in flames, and lo, they cried and saw the fit man and the lame, the rich man and the horse, the poor man and the dame. The folk of every sort begged mercy of our Lord. But many turned their minds to robbery and theft, taking all that they could find till there was nothing left, hiding goods of every kind into any bag or cleft. They kept searching more and more and thanked the goodwill of the Lord. Noch will heute in winzig singen mit meinen Voicen Chor, neue Geiselingen, wie jedermann wissen soll, von der Macht, in der man geben, das gibt es das einmal, so gnädig in der Strebe, es auf Abendnacht. Es war sein großen Jammer, da dauert der Rialt, und bei Leuten in die Laben von Juden, jung und alt. Juden, dass sie kennen Wald, und Jörgs geht euch Bladen, Mann ab und Neid. Mein Weißreich bringt euch Bladen, am Chips in die Welt. Elitärten Scharen, sie gängen ab, was sie, sind Menschen reich zu werden, gar in kurzer Zeit. Die sagen das Anglikieren und dann dem Abonnai.
Isn't that pretty? Isn't that nice? Look, the instrumentation is not, we don't have evidence that that's the instrumentation. This was a sung song. But I really, it's amazing what Avery and these other scholar performers are doing to like bring this alive in a way that's, you know, beautiful and communicative. So while most Jewish music was orally transmitted at this time, Shakespeare's era did see some remarkable, if brief, experiments with musical notation, mostly in the Italian sphere. Some say that there are no coincidences. So I present to you one of the most amazing coincidences, and it's the 400-year anniversary of both of them.
First folio.
Yes, you're right. The same year, two things get published. The first folio of William Shakespeare, and also Salomone Rossi's Hashirim Asher Lishlomo, the Songs of Solomon, the first ever book of Hebrew choral music for Jewish worship. Now, Salomone Rossi, you can read a lot about. He was a court musician at the Gonzagan court in Mantua, where there were a lot of Jews working as dance masters and musicians and theater actors and composers. It was a very, very rich scene. And actually, a lot of that scene ended up going to Venice after I think there was a war, and they ended up having to leave, I think, the Holy Roman Empire, but I might be wrong saying that, so don't quote me. And they end up going to be with Rabbi Leon de Modena, who befriends Rossi, and that he's the same rabbi we spoke of earlier in this week. He's the rabbi who sends a book about Jewish worship to John Selwyn in England in the 1620s. So, and wider than that. So there's many, many connections. But Rossi's innovation was a short-lived experiment in choral writing, which would otherwise remain mostly dormant among German or Ashkenazi Jews until the 19th century. But I want to share you about 4 minutes of an amazing contemporary ensemble of Israeli singers, Profeti de la Quinta, singing one of Rossi's iconic pieces, Psalm 137, Al Naharot Bavel, by the waters of Babylon. By the way, for those of you who do early music and are interested, the director of this ensemble, Eram Rotem, an Israeli musicologist and singer, has a wonderful website, earlymusicsources.com, I think. And he has tons of YouTube videos all about like what it was like to read, just like Shakespeare's actors learned from parts, what it was like to read choral music from parts and not have the whole thing in front of you, right? There's a different relationship there, different type of listening. So he's a really wonderful scholar. And as you'll see here in a second, amazing, amazing singing. Sorry, guys, I didn't mean to talk while unmuted. This was Profeti de la Quinta, or de la Quinta. It is Profeti and then Della, Della, and Quinta, Quinta. Look them up. They do amazing, amazing work. Doing Rossi in the original Spanish synagogue where he would have been heard. Now, remember, the Spanish Jews are the affluent Jews. This is where the King of France came to visit in this very synagogue. And so this kind of art music and double choir music eventually that Leon de Modena would lead in this synagogue come from a more elite tradition. The German Jews, the Ashkenazi Jews, took a little longer to get to the art music scene, which we will see a little bit right now. Because this experiment in musical, let me just get to the next slide if I can. Aha, very good. Oh, we get to a Commedia dell'arte. That's going to be fun, but not yet. This experiment in musical harmony was far from the norm in Jewish circles. In fact, you can actually trace a whole history of how Christians constructed their own self-image and their own sound as one of harmony, but had this polemic that the sounds of the Jews were one of noise. This is, by the way, a little bit of a parallel between how Black music was seen in America in the early 20th century versus the music of the white culture in America as noise versus the harmony, ordered culture. So contemporaneous with Shakespeare, we also have a genre of Jew songs, of songs making fun of Jews as this disordered, noisy bunch. We have 11 that we have documented. And this comes from a Commedia dell'arte musical comedy, L'Amiparnasso, from 1597, during the life of Shakespeare's, and by the famous Orazio Vecchi. By the way, Orazio Vecchi, other stuff that he did was actually set and translated by Leon de Modena. So this is not a guy, he's not just, it's not just the good guys and the bad guys. These guys are all together, even though there's some cultural tension. Is there a quick question, Sheila?
Yes. Is this in our time what you were teaching us yesterday about only Jewish children cry and scream? Did I dream that?
I don't remember saying about that. Might be from something I'm not remembering it right now, but let's talk after if it comes back to you. No problem. So it's not typical that you get to hear anti-Semitic music or that people will say, let's listen to some anti-Semitic music. But I guess I'm a cantor. I'm giving you permission for historical purposes. In this scene, a comic character, Franca Trippa, who you'll hear at the beginning, is trying to get some Jews to do business with him, only to realize that they're in their house praying on the Sabbath. So let's listen closely to what these Jews sound like in Christian comedy in Italy during the life of Shakespeare.
Va agli ebrei, Franca Trippa a porre un pegno. La porta forte scuote e una babelle sode di voci e orribili favelle.
That's a little bit of a Jew song from this period. For those of you a little Hebrew, you might have heard some fake Hebrew, Barukai, Merdokai. Also, but one of the main things they say is La Baruch Haba. Baruch Haba is Baruch Haba. Blessed is he who comes. That is the words of the circumcision. Circumcision ceremonies were doing publicly. And so one of the things Christians would have heard is Jews going Baruch Haba to the new baby boy when they were being circumcised at that ceremony. So that's one of the, Don Haran is a scholar, has done a lot of this. That's one of the parts of the fake Hebrew language that they're putting in there. And again, this is an interpretation by these modern interpreters of Commedia dell'arte, of Becky's work. But the idea is that the Jews are, I think there are some notes in the music for this, are nasal, it's supposed to be done nasally, and are making a ruckus. They're supposed to be disordered in the way they hear them, even though you are hearing them in a madrigal. And there's some more Jewish stuff later in here. This is all part of a bigger idea at this time that Jewish music or noise was unharmonious, insincere, manipulative, materialistic, or in some way morally or spiritually dangerous. This idea was actually made in contradistinction and part of the cultural production of the entire Western Christian music tradition, which was exemplified by order and harmony. Perhaps the order and harmony that Jesus of Nazareth, by his sacrifice and resolving the question of sin, brought to the world. That's my interpretation, but I don't even know if people say it in that way. If you're interested in this, Dr. Ruta Cohen of Hebrew University wrote a great book, The Music Libel Against the Jews. I'll show you the cover in just a second. And a few slides, or a couple more slides. Okay, let's go on to, let's not get there yet. Not gonna play until we're ready. Okay, before moving on to my own research on Ashkenazi cantors, I wanna feature the work of another fantastic ensemble, Simchat HaNefesh, led by my thesis advisor and amazing scholar performer, Diana Matut. Their improvisational Baroque performances use melodies, many of which were used by Jews, and of which we have direct notation of from the non-Jewish source that they based it on. So the two pieces you're going to hear in the first 3 minutes of this clip are going to be a dance melody from a Jewish dance master in northern Italy. I think it's Giuliano da Pesaro. You'll see it written in the corner. And then the next song, Pumai Pumai Polen, dates the era of Shakespeare. It was written down in 1600. It is based on a humorous German song and is almost a translation of it, parts of it. Spottlied auf den aus Krakau entflohenen Polenkönig Heinrich III von Anjou. Written in 1574. What's it about? It's a song making fun of the French king, Henry III, who was crowned king of Poland in 1574, but then had to flee back to France because he was an absent monarch and they were going to depose him. So this song was adapted by Jews in two known poetic versions, Pumai Pumai, both as a more direct parody of this historical event and as a general song for the holiday of Purim. So this is Diana's Baroque ensemble playing these two tunes. I'm so sorry, guys. I always start and then, oh, I have to unmute. Yes,
I noticed this was at a performance at, what was it called? Klezmer?
yeah, Klezmer Worlds, yes.
Okay, so what is the root of klezmer music? Is it in this tradition?
I will tell you about klezmer music at the end. That is that's another kit and caboodle, but I will happy to talk about it. But I'm gonna get to the last 3 slides and end my talking in like 6:05, and then I'll take questions from the floor, both floors. Very good. It's a good question, by the way. So by the turn of oh, here we go. Now here is, oh wait, I want to make sure I get to the right thing. Okay, gotta change slides. There we go. Now here's nope, that's not the right sheet of paper. Where's the right sheet of paper? There it is. Thank you. Now, in continental Europe, as English is experiencing its glorious revolution and the interregnum, we're getting into, I guess, the long Shakespearean. How long does the long Shakespearean era go? Okay, well, in this time, it definitely 1640. This is an era in which Ashkenazi Jews, that is Yiddish-speaking Jews of Franco-German descent, are beginning to toy more and more with this technology of Western music and with musical specialization in general. This is the subject of my doctoral work. Sephardic congregations were the places of major musical experimentation and literacy in Italy, but the use of music notation a much slower leak into Ashkenazi Jewish life, possibly not just because of culture issues, but because of class and access. Ashkenazi Jews were not as affluent as soon. But what has happened for Ashkenazi Jews by the turn of the 18th century, and here come the jokes, is something very dramatic. A new viral form of musical activity has begun to take root, led by an increasingly specialized and professionalized group. Those are the Ashkenazi cantors. There is a new slide. It's coming. Here it is. Cantors at this time are taking on a new science of music. And people are really annoyed at them. This rabbi, who's very into Kabbalah and being very particular about religious life, he says in 1560, so during Henry II, that's during the Elizabethan era, yes, cantors of this generation have ceased to be writers of the Torah, of tefillin, of phylacteries, and of other scrolls. They don't attend to correct grammar and not to the sense of the prayers, but just to their singing without regard for the meaning of the words. They neglect the traditional melodies of their forefathers. What's going on, man? Says Rabbi Treves. But cantors are starting to think about life as musical specialists and what that means. They are normally generalists teaching school children and doing ritual slaughter and writing secret documents, all sorts of communal work. But by the time this early 18th century comes around, you get statements like this. I'm sorry for the spacing. He says, this is a cantor in 1718, I was accepted, his first job, to the Holy Community of Ferzeh, where they hearkened to my voice, actually his second job. And there, parakti et all hashrita me al sabarai. I threw off the yoke of ritual slaughter from my shoulders. Nor would I have to teach children anymore, but to be the master of one service, the holy office of the synagogue. So Ashkenazi cantors are transforming into specialists, into that music is their vocation more exclusively than ever before. This is not a universal thing. The ground level thing is the non-musical virus is cantors or generalists doing everything and leading prayer in the oral forms that they know. But there is a bubbling up of change, and it gets most acutely expressed in the institution of the Mishorim. Mishorim, it is a biblical term for singers that was used to describe singers in the biblical temple. And they start to become part of this gig economy with cantors traveling around and enhancing the cantors' melodic database of melodies to use in the synagogue. These were small groups, 2 to 10 singers, at minimum a boss, a low voice singer, and a zinger, who could be a boy or a high voice singer, sometimes called a tenor or a descant. These mishorim were predominantly, they weren't harmony. They were alternately singing with the cantor, giving him a rest and adding embellishments, even wordless melodies like da, 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 and la, 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 la. There's an argument to be made that the Hasidic nigun is a result of transgressive cantors in the early 18th century, breaking music away from the word. So most of the manuscripts of these singers point to their singing in a Western Baroque style. And in fact, they're more often provided instrumental textures, instrumental sounds, imitating things like bassoons and flutes rather than vocal textures. You could even think of them as proto-a cappella groups, or the swingle singers, if you're more of a classical person. And they had spread to nearly all major Ashkenazi communities by the early 18th century and were the norm in the 19th century. You can listen to this Christian observer from England, Charles Burney, visits Amsterdam to hear this. And he has a ball describing it. This is the book, by the way, by Ruth Cohen. He says, as every species of national music seemed to merit my attention, I went to the Synagogue of the German Jews in the city to hear what the musical performance during their religious rites was and how far it differed from that of other synagogues where I heard singing in different parts of Europe. At my first entrance, one of the priests was chanting part of the service in a kind of ancient canto fermo. His responses were made by, I can't read what's there, in a manner which resembled the hum of bees. This is part of the music libel. This is the noise thing. And if you've ever been to a traditional synagogue, you can hear Jews all praying to themselves because the obligation to pray is not on the leaders, it's on everybody to do their own liturgy themselves. And so they go, they mumble their words to themselves until it's time for a communal moment. After this, three of the sweet singers of Israel, which it seems are famous here and much attended to by Christians, began to sing a kind of jolly modern melody, sometimes in unison, sometimes in parts to a lot of tall de roll instead of words, which to me seem very farcical. One of these voices was a falsetto, more like the upper part of a bad Vox Humana stop in an organ than a natural voice. I remember seeing an advertisement in an English newspaper of a barber who undertook to dress hair in such a manner as to exactly resemble a peruke. And this finger might equally boast of having the art, not of singing like a human creature, but of making his voice like a very bad imitation of one. And he goes on to describe these guys sounding like bassoons and running triplets, say a bad bassoon, sometimes continued as like a drone bass, right? It is impossible for me to divine what ideas these Jews themselves annex to this vociferation. I shall therefore neither pronounce it to be good or bad in itself. I shall only say it is very unlike what we Christians are used to in the divine service. So this is Charles Burney in his travelogue from this time. Okay, here we go. Now here's the twist. This is the final twist I'm going to share with you before we come to a close. What begins to happen is this music libel against the Jews begin to look over their shoulder at these Ashkenazi Jews like this and have a similar reaction to Mr. Burney and say, hey, you Ashkenazi Jews are making noise. It's too loud. It's too undisciplined. It's unstudied. It's not classy. You praise screaming, not to mention that they're also ignorant, but that the style is in some ways a similar critique to what we heard from Christians. I want to show you this source from a little earlier in the British Library, not in the British Library, this is a GTS, but this is a letter from a Sephardic Jew in Amsterdam who moves to London, goes to the London community. Ashkenazi Jews were only let back in England formally, I think in 1606, then to build a synagogue in 1656, but Ashkenazi Jews only got a synagogue in 1690. So shortly afterwards, he goes in there, and I'm not translating a lot directly here. By the way, this man is an affluent Sephardic Jew who ends up donating his Hebraica collection to the British Library. In 1743, it becomes the inaugural Hebraica collection of the British Library in London. And he says that you guys are the same critiques of the Christians. You guys are too loud. This is unruly. This has no class. This is, profanation of the synagogue. And so my diagnosis is by the end of this long Shakespeare era, the literate and assimilated musical cultures of the Jews, which are Sephardim, they're cultured Jews, they look at the German and Polish Jews and say, you guys are noise. It's like in the Freudian sense that they've identified with the aggressor. And this sets the stage in so many ways for the modernization that occurs in the 19th century, where Jews once again begin in Germany, France, and England to pick up where Rossi left off, to take on musical notation and choral writing through the leadership of many individuals, but in particular, the pioneering model of the Viennese cantor Salomon Sulzer, who takes the whole Viennese choral tradition and makes it married to the Jewish liturgy in a way that, again, goes viral. So I hope that this has been, let me stop my share. I hope this has been an enlightening journey through Jewish music in the age of Shakespeare, some of the theological dynamics, some of the sounds that we, thank God to good scholars, get to hear. And I am so glad you all are here. And now I'm open to your questions and comments.
Go anywhere.
I'm not going.
Don't go
I'm
anywhere.
right here.
Okay. Hang on. I want to just, you know, I went to cantorial school for 6 years and I had some really good teachers. The discipline of, you know, the evolution of Jewish liturgical music was new to me in 92. By the time I graduated at the end of the 90s, I'd been exposed to so much. And what Cantor Austerklein was able to do for you right now is distill some really sophisticated information that nobody knows for you in this room and for you on Zoom. You were so lucky that you had a chance to hear this. And I just want to say, wow, and para kadosha, which means holy cow. Now, I also want to say too, that the other thing that the one thing that I would just say is what Salomon Sulzer did was he took that tradition with the ancient oral motifs, many of which had existed. We don't even know how far back they go, but they certainly from the, let's say the year 1000, from, you know, when the Italian, when Judaism started to spread through Europe via Italy and music started to emerge, he took the traditional sounds and westernized them. And, you know, to the degree that you can say anything exists, what's left in the American synagogue, it is the fragment and remnant of that, and for a later time. So I want to invite those of you who have questions to come up to the podium, and you can stand where I am, or if you want, you can ask that, and I will repeat your question, and then you can answer. Okay. Howard, I saw that you had a question.
I did. Now, okay.
Okay, yeah,
Now
go.
I have to walk up.
Come on, come up, Howard. Okay, you can do it, Howard. You're gonna come stand right where I am.
Very good. I always like standing next to you. Okay. Hi, can y'all hear me? Okay, so I'm wondering how we got to what relationship the sacred music has to the vernacular popular music, both in and out of the Jewish community that was originated in the Jewish community and either became popular for fun in the Jewish community or somehow escaped from the Jewish community and got into popular music, generally in the, you know, in the Germanic cultures and wherever else this was going on.
Thank you. So it's a general mode that, you know, Jewish cultures sort of assimilated and adopted sounds from their environments. But certainly a point exists where there are things that are in and out. Rabbis will begin to complain, oh, there's music from the theater. Oh, there's music from this and that. But indeed, some of these things just got mikvah'd or baptized through use. I'll comment on, when we're talking about secular or quote secular music in the Jewish sphere, about the klezmer tradition. There were two traditions, really, when we talk about Ashkenazi, about German-speaking Jewry, we're talking about sort of two cultural spheres, the Western sphere, sort of the German sphere, and then the Eastern sphere, which is the Polish sphere. In the Western sphere, Jewish music in general was a lot more, the sound was a lot more integrated into German culture. It was a lot more, it had a lot more German sounds. And indeed, the German tradition of chant is a lot more just major. There's a lot more just major modes like you would find in the German environment. Well, not exclusively, certainly. But in Eastern Europe, among the Polish Jews, there was a different type of professionalism among musicians. The klezmers, and this is the research of Walter Zev Feldman, the klezmers become a guild, a actual like European style guild in the early 1500s in Prague, and then slightly later in the mid 1500s in Poland. And again, this is during a time of great Jewish organization and social cohesion under the Council of the Four Lands under Poland-Lithuania, which is a very strong and powerful kingdom for a while. So there's a lot more power and actually the klezmers become a hereditary profession. They become a guild profession. Actually, one of my theories is that cantors actually learn from this and then model a lot of their musical developments, including the bringing in of Baroque music from the klezmers in the Eastern Sphere. Before the end of the long Shakespeare era, the Chmielnicki massacres in 1648 sent tons of Polish Jews all into Western Europe, and they get lots and lots of jobs and bring with them, my hypothesis is they bring this Mishorim, chorister style, not choral harmony, but improvisational folk style, which is incredibly popular and also incredibly infuriating. It's like kind of like Twitter when it's like there's like an 18th century Twitter storm of rabbis who kind of like write anonymous Reddit posts about how horrible these cantors are, and I can't even write my name because the people love this and they have a crazy head. And so the main point is that some of the instrumental tradition may be interacting with the vocal sacred music tradition in this environment. That somewhat answers the question.
We have some questions from on Zoom, but yes, well, it's Vivian.
Oh, no,
Oh.
you have further questions.
Oh, do I have other questions here? Did you have a hand? Okay, we're gonna go to the Zoom.
Well,
So first, Matt, what is the best book reference to help trace the history of the court Jews and the roles they historically played within the various royal courts in Europe? Not only musicians, but bankers, et cetera. That's the question. That is from Daniel. Singer Daniel.
Thank Dan Singer, Cantor Dan Singer. Thank you, Dan, for being here. I don't know the best book to study court Jews. A really nice a snapshot is in a great book by Joshua Teplitsky about David Oppenheimer, who was the chief rabbi of Prague, and who also made he was a massive book collector, and his collection made its way to Oxford University and is in the Bodleian Library, and has tons of Yiddish songs. That's where my advisor Diana did a lot of research on the things that you heard from her ensemble. I don't know the best book on court Jews, but I know that he was an epic court Jew and connected to other court Jews, and these were Jews that were close to the financing of major governments in and across Europe, and they were involved in helping people go to Israel and helping save people from difficult circumstances. They had a very, very strong role in the culture.
Quick question, you repeated. How much Jewish music did Shakespeare actually have a chance to hear?
How much Jewish music did Shakespeare actually have a chance to hear? Probably, I don't know of any Jew songs in that way in the English repertoire. They're mostly Italian. It depends on whether you think he traveled to Italy or not. The typical you think not. But Shakespeare, again, there were so few Jews at his time. They were brought in, and remember, there was an assassination attempt on Elizabeth of First Life by a Sephardic Jew. Allegedly, he may have actually tried to do it for all we know. But that also, like whatever little community there was, they got kicked out again. So Shakespeare really wouldn't have met, other than maybe these court Jews, maybe the Bassano family, who were already acculturated and Christianized. He wouldn't really have heard Jewish music per se. He would just hear music performed by Jews. In fact, just like Henry VIII's piece was probably, you heard, it was probably performed by those Jews or those Christianized Jews.
As Vivian makes her way here to answer her question, I'm going to say what's really interesting is that begs the question, is music that's performed by Jewish people, Jewish music? It's a really interesting I mean, we've asked that question before. Like, is Sondheim Jewish music? Because you know what I'm saying? But you'll think about that while Vivian comes and
Yes,
asks the
come on,
questions.
Vivian.
Well, I have a couple of comments to make about some of the material that Cantor Austerklein has given us today. One is that one of my young humanities core colleagues writes, he has a friend who worked from graduate school at Indiana University named Margot Valles, who worked on Yiddish folk, Arthurian folk tales. And he says there's just lots of good stuff out there. So for those of you who are interested, that's one recommendation. And of course, I was happy as an 18th century scholar to see the diary of Charles Burney, one of the famous musical families of his time. His son, he had a son, a daughter, Frances Burney, who was a friend of Samuel Johnson's. And his testimony is something that one would value, his respect for the music that he heard, because he was part of the high musical culture of England and London at that time. Thank you.
Thank you.
These are just
Thank you.
comments,
Thank you for the comment.
not
Very rich.
questions, unless you know Margot Valles.
I don't know Margot Valles, but I know that there is a lot of Arthurian Yiddish legend, and I'm glad that people are writing about it.
We have another question.
Please, I'll repeat it.
So during Shakespeare's time, women were forbidden from singing. So would, and you know, we know men and boys played their roles. Any historical intersection between the prohibition of women singing, Kol Isha, right, and acting in secular society, and people singing in synagogues?
So just so for people who know, there is a traditional prohibition in Orthodox and older Judaisms of women singing in public because it is considered erotic. Another thing we saw earlier in the Shakespearean era. Oh, if the men do it, it's fine. If the women, so both for getting to do good things and getting to do bad things. It's a lame thing, at least from my perspective. So, you know, the connection between, here's what I can say, is that both for cantors and for Salomone Rossi, the specialization in music actually allowed for a more liberal attitude to emerge regarding women. Salomone Rossi's, I believe his sister was actually an opera singer in that period in time in the 1600s. Similarly, there's really, and in the Ashkenazi realm, you know, women have their own synagogues. There's actually, you know, gravestones of, for example, Urania of Worms, who was and Dulce was the wife of the famous rabbi. And these guys were known for their beautiful singing of religious poetry, of piyutim in the synagogue. So women had a realm of singing. It was just as a fürzogerin or as a zogerka, as a female prayer leader on their side of the mechitza, their side of the division between men and women in traditional worship. But I think what is most telling to me is that when you have these figures like Salomone Rossi and especially Salman Zulzer, their kids end up their female kids end up going into music, and in a way that's perhaps a little more edgy. And I think this, you know, Ted Gioia, I remember learning from him that he's a writer on music, originally from San Francisco. He writes that, you know, music, it expands human freedom. It's something that expands internality. Music is like a monologue, you know, it externalizes human emotions, it externalizes human psychology, it maximizes human freedom. And so I'm not surprised that in figures who had great musical power, that their children, especially their female children, get to look to opportunities which actually maximize some more of their available freedoms as well, musically or otherwise. Especially if you think of Amelia Lear, right, who's from a musical family, a musical Jewish family. She has this, you know, feminist publication. So it's, for me, it's an extension of the same thing.
So, are there other questions on the chat?
There are, but there might be some.
Oh, yes.
There's Bill Rosenshine is raising his hand, so if we could hear.
Sure, okay.
hear him.
Let's unmute Dove.
Yeah, he can unmute by himself, I
Oh,
think.
okay.
Please.
Yes, thank you. Talking again about Rossi, especially since we're coming up on this auspicious anniversary. I find it odd that neither he nor almost any of his contemporaries notated anything but synagogue music. His big collection, as you know, it was all synagogue music. It was all or Tehillim, and nothing with Zmerot Shabbat, say, or songs for Pesach, for the Seder. And I'm wondering, how it is, why such a focus on synagogue music when there's such a large when there's such a large variety of places where music even then would clearly be sung and played.
So that's an excellent comment. I think that for Rossi, who, just to clarify for people here, Salman Rossi did not just compose Hebrew music. He had 300 different compositions he composed. Arguably, he was actually some people argue he was one of the originators of the sonata form. He was friends with the trio sonata form. He was friends with Monteverdi. He was a accomplished secular composer. Why does he choose to do synagogue music for the public sphere rather than the private sphere of like the Sur Michelot that we heard? I think it's because of what the music means. Remember, Christians are coming to synagogue, even though there's this allergy to Jews, there's also a weird draw. And so perhaps it's to show in the most public realm the beauty of our worship, right? The beauty of our words. I don't think it's necessarily as natural, even though it might be today, that people would get around casually and read music and sing. That's more in a European context of a 19th century phenomenon, thinking of things like the Blue Book in London, where they had synagogue choral music for Anglican Jews, and they wanted people to go home and learn it at home on the piano, which was a new technology domesticated and going into people's houses. But for Rossi, he writes it's supposed to be in honor of Chagim, in honor of festivals, to make these special occasions even more special. And so I think both in the religious realm and also the political realm, in showing the Christians who we are culturally, in which Italian Jews were very, Italy is the place where rabbis are becoming doctors in Italian universities and are very involved in Christian Hebraism and publishing and all sorts of cultural activity. I just think that it's meant to be public because that's an authentic place both to be seen by others, but also where you have sacred singing that's meant for God. It's in tefillah b'tzibur, in statutory prayer, and so I think it's more precious when it's done in that context. But that's an excellent comment, Dov.
Two more questions. One is Marcia Dubrow can you comment?
Oh yeah, you please.
Yeah, okay, Marcia, give it up. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Matt. That was a fantastic presentation. A couple of things. You didn't mention the fact that some non-Jewish composers were composing Hebrew language songs with melodies, such as Benedetto Marcello and his Ma'ot Sur. Can you comment on the background of this now well-known composition and for whom and when and why it was prepared and what the reception history of it is?
So Marcia is rightfully pointing out a book by Benedetto Marcello, who was an 18th century Christian composer. I will say what I know of this work is mostly defined by Edwin Cerusi's work on this book, and Cerusi argues that this is not composition at all. This is ethnography. But Marcello actually had informers in the Ashkenazi community and in the Sephardi communities that he went to, and was writing down pretty much more or less actual melodies that he heard. And if he does some structural analysis of, for example, the and shows analogs that this is a standard German song, and that it's likely, because Jewish music was oral, that this is actually a long passed down oral melody. So Marcello, it depends if you see her as a composer or as an ethnographer. And to my knowledge, and from what I've read from Dr. Ceruzzi's work, I see him as an ethnographer. Actually, I didn't get to talk about him. He's another person who notates Jewish melodies just a little later, some of which are done and known because they're all published and you can see them. He has 11 different melodies from the Ashkenazim and others from the Sephardim. So that's what I would offer on the question of Marcello. And I thank you for bringing him up.
Oh, okay. Well, just as an adjunct to that, what are you suggesting then that there were a lot of melodies that may have been introduced that were actually contrafacta of melodies in circulation in the general public, i.e. non-Jewish, or,
I would definitely say that. I don't know that those are the ones in Marcello's work, but certainly, the Jews are putting non-Jewish melodies in the mikvah left and right. They're adapting them left and right, and some scholars like Eric Berner say this really happens in like the 15th century, the era where piyut is getting bigger and cantors are getting more interested in music and becoming less rabbinic and more transgressive. But certainly both are happening, and German Jewish music sounds like music from Germany. It's actually the Polish music that's a little more distinct because you have this confluence of Ottoman influences and Tartar influences and Ashkenazi influences and Slavic influences that make a little more of a distinctive other kind of a music culture in that context. So both are certainly happening, and as we mentioned, some melodies, there's a lot more. Actually, if you get the Simchat HaNefesh CD, you can hear a lot more of these melodies that were adapted. There's a melody that was sung for the death of a cantor in 1656. Benigun Braunslied. This is actually a German love song. Braune Farbe und Freundlichkeit singt einander ein Verleibet. The song is actually put to El Male Rachamim, which is a Yiddish poem about sad stuff, and then it gets done for lots of sad things.
Yeah.
So again, there's an interplay between stuff that's ours and stuff that's theirs but becomes ours.
Thank you.
Shauna, I want to invite Shauna to unmute and just share some of her thoughts, and then we'll wrap this up. That's
Please.
the last comment. Shauna?
Me?
Yes.
Shauna, me? Okay, so you mean some of the things that I put in the chat that you thought were interesting?
Yes.
Okay, so my musical heritage comes first from my father, who grew up in a very tiny Hasidic community in Brooklyn, the Monastricha Rebbe. The people, his parents, and came to Brooklyn not knowing anybody, but found this community. But apparently they all came from little tiny shtetls in the middle of the forests of the Ukraine, somewhere between Kiev and Lviv. And I learned in the old-fashioned oral tradition of singing with my dad as a kid, singing in Hebrew, of course, as the men always sang in Hebrew, liturgical music. When I got older, I started to hear Balkan music and Middle Eastern music, and I really loved that. And I got really interested in Sephardic music, so I started to specialize in that. And one of the things that I really noticed about this wonderful program is that it emphasized the kind of higher or more Western music, even of the Sephardim. It was about the Sephardim who went to Italy and then Amsterdam and London and how they influenced back and forth with the German. Whereas my background is in a very traditional, folky type of thing from both the little Ukrainian Jewish Hasids, and that's one of the things that I think Balkan music appealed to me. It had a lot of the same modes. The Hasidic music is modal. It's not anything like German music. So that's for another time to talk about the areas where folk music and synagogue music were probably more close than in Western Europe and that whole thing.
Thank you. I think that it's so very easy in concerts of Jewish music to like have this narrative of like the temple till today, right? There was big Jewish music with complexity and artistry in the temple. Then let's skip 1500 years or 1600 years to Salmon Russi, who did it again with Western notation. Then let's skip to Salman Zulzer, who did high art music in the 19th century. And now we have all this wonderful stuff now. And this is the Messiah time. This is Mashiach time. And there's a huge ignorance of the folk element. I think the folk element is very present in Germany. That's what the Tzur Mishelo Achalnu, all they're doing is assimilating folk stuff because they have no access to art, music, or all that other stuff.
Right.
And indeed, the tradition that of the Mishurim is really it's not an elitist tradition, it is a guild tradition. It is elitist only in the sense that the klezmer people are elitist. Why? Because they marry and have hereditary guilds and have a internal professionalized culture. So it's professionalized music, but honestly, the Ashkenazi Mishurim music, which I'm passionate about and I study, it's like street Baroque music. It's not, like the upper class stuff. It's dirty street improv, right? And that's why it's still noise. That's why it's still noise to all of these high class people who are getting into high class, whether they're Sephardi and eventually Ashkenazi, when the Ashkenazim can become part of that society, they're like, let's get rid of that. So I agree with you. The folk music is super important, and it's definitely a part of the Western, tradition as well as the Eastern tradition. They just develop with it in different ways.
Okay, so first of all, Shauna, thank you for bringing that up. And really, what you open up is the next chapter of the lecture that would really take us from. I mean, I'm not even being funny, from the 1700s to present time. I mean, that would be another hour and a half, and we'd barely scratch the surface. But it's really like a chant. It's like a chili of all of those different things happening. And as people started to travel more and go everywhere, things were shared and there was overlap and stuff like that. I have a question for you. Do you have a clip? I would love for these people to hear real Mishurim in a synagogue. Do you have anything like that where you could just close us out with that? Because you need to hear this sort of like dirty street.
Well,
that's and if you don't know,
I don't
pressure.
right now. But the Mishurim that we know today that are part of the Ashkenazi landscape in the 19th and 20th century are a little different than this, because they get harmony. By the end of the 19th century, there's a little bit of like, there are chords coming in. Before, it's just one guy noodling for a long time, another guy noodling for a long time.
Gotcha.
Eventually, they do a very quick chord and then more noodling.
Okay.
But Mishurim, even from that era of 300 years ago, become part of the Ashkenazi soundscape. You can hear when you have a boy alto solo singing, Yevorech, Yevorech. This is an old Olshanetsky tune from the mid-19th, 20th century. There's the boy solo, the boy alto, which you can still hear in like Hasidic stuff.
Yeah.
That's from that Chazan bass zinger trio.
Yeah.
And then there's a role for the bass, the bass, sings. There's a kind of solo bass role. That's an archetypal role in cantorial music in the 19th and 20th century. So the echoes of the folk forms we're seeing here make it into the more expanding artistic forms that we see in the 19th and 20th century and are still ringing in our ears.
Let's give Matt the biggest hand ever.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Dr. Lupton, to Olivia for being our tech person. Thank you so much. And to Rabbi Cantor Tilchin for making this possible. There are like 60 or 70 chat things. I want to read all of them. You may write me at mattausterklein at gmail.com. I'll put that in the chat. Oh, good. Thank you. Please do. Or you can visit my website at mattausterklein.com for I have more lectures about this stuff that more deal with my actual my research rather than the background stuff we had today.
Comment that in homage to Comedy of Errors, it was lovely having this 27 twins up here.
And
I'm like a drop of water.
Can you give a highlight into tomorrow's lecture?
Tomorrow's lecture, we are going to, this is like my last lecture of this series, and we're going to see Comedy of Errors in the evening. But tomorrow's lecture is going to be about magic and exorcism in the Comedy of Errors, as I believe, Olivia, correct me, is Anne Smith at Oxford? Is that the- Anna Smith at Oxford observed about Comedy of Errors, something it blew my mind. Comedy of Errors has more witches than Macbeth, more mentions of magic than Midsummer Night's Dream and conjuring than Midsummer Night's Dream, and more mentions of the devil and Satan than any other Shakespeare play. So we think this is a benign comedy about two twins hooking up with each other's girlfriends, but it's really not. There's a lot of deep, religious imagery going on, and we're going to see actually a secret Jewish connection that may be actually quite shocking. So please come tomorrow at 1.
Yay. Please join us if you can. All are welcome to meet us at Humanities Gateway 1010. We'll see you tomorrow at 1 o'clock.
Can you see the chat from? Thank you.
I think it will.
It will. I wanted to send it.